Good evening, and welcome back to Footnotes and Folly. We return to Maspero's History of Imperial Egypt, and to the second part of our journey. In the first part we saw Egypt throw off the foreign shepherd kings in a long war of liberation, and we surveyed the land of Canaan, the Canaan of the Bible itself that lay before her. That war had hardened a sheltered valley into a conqueror, and now the conquerors march in earnest. In this part we meet a woman who made herself pharaoh and sent a fleet to the fabled land of perfumes, the greatest warrior king Egypt ever produced, and the day his whole fate was decided in a mountain pass before a town called Megiddo, and the golden noon of the empire under Amenhotep the Magnificent. We begin with the woman who was king. Now the conquerors enter, and the great age of the 18th dynasty begins in earnest. Ahmose had freed Egypt, his successors set about making her an empire. But before we come to the mightiest conqueror of them all, we must meet one of the most extraordinary figures in the whole of Egyptian history, a woman who put on the crown and the false beard of a pharaoh and ruled the land as king, Hatshepsut. Hers is a reign not of war but of peace and splendor, and its crowning glory is a voyager fleet sent to the fabled land of perfumes at the edge of the world. Let us follow her.
First, briefly, the kings who cleared her way. After Ahmose came his son Amenhotep I, who consolidated the freed kingdom, and then a soldier king of tremendous energy, Thutmose I, who took the new Egyptian war machine and drove it outward in both directions, south, deep into Nubia past the cataracts, and north, clear across Syria to the banks of the Euphrates itself, where he set up a boundary stone to mark how far the arm of Egypt now reached. In a single reign the sheltered valley had become a power that fought on the great river of Mesopotamia. Thutmose I is the true founder of the empire's reach, and it was his daughter who would next hold the throne. That daughter was Hatshepsut, and her path to power is one of the boldest in history. When her brother died, the heir was a boy, her young stepson, the future Thutmose III, born to a lesser wife, and Hatshepsut took the regency for him. But she did not stay a regent. Step by step she took to herself the full style and titles of pharaoh, not queen, but king, and had herself carved on her monuments as a man, in the kilt and crown of a pharaoh, with the long-plaited false beard of royalty hanging from her chin. Egypt had been ruled by women before in name. Hatshepsut ruled as a king in her own right, and ruled well, for some 2 decades, and she gave Egypt not war but peace and a great flowering of art and building, crowned by her own incomparable terraced temple rising in 3 colonnaded tiers against the cliffs at Deir el-Bahari, across the river from Thebes. It is one of the loveliest buildings the ancient world ever raised, and it was a woman king who built it. And on the walls of that temple she carved the proudest achievement of her reign, the expedition to Punt. Punt was the half-legendary land of perfumes, far to the south on the Red Sea, somewhere on the Somali coast, the source of the precious incense and myrrh the temples burned, a place so distant that for centuries no Egyptian had gone there, and its gums had reached Egypt only second-hand, through many grasping foreign hands. Hatshepsut resolved to go to the source. At the command, she said, of the god Amen himself, who declared in his sanctuary that the roads to the ladders of incense should once more be trodden, she had 5 fine galleys built and manned with picked crews, loaded them with goods to trade, and sent them down the Red Sea in quest of the incense land. That the ways which lead to Punt should be explored, and that the roads to the ladders of incense should be trodden, that the vessels may be laden joyfully with living incense trees and with all the products of this earth. And the fleet came home in triumph, and Hatshepsut had every wonder of it painted on her temple, so that we can still see the whole voyage 4,000 years later. We see the ships reaching the strange shore, the curious dome-shaped huts of Punt on their stilts among the palms, the chief of Punt coming to meet the Egyptians, and behind him his queen, a woman of such famous and extraordinary girth that her portrait on the wall is one of the most reproduced images in all Egyptology. We see the trading, and then the loading. The decks piled with the treasures of the south, sacks of fragrant gum, ebony and ivory, gold, apes and baboons and panther skins, and, most prized of all, whole living incense trees, dug up with their roots in baskets, to be carried home and planted in the garden of the god at Thebes. It is a scene of pure wonder and delight, the proudest peaceful achievement of Egypt's woman king. Not a city storm, but a fleet sent to the world's edge and brought safely home laden with the fragrance of the gods.
Let that close our chapter on Hatshepsut, on her ships coming home heavy with myrrh. She is a figure who delights me, and ought to delight your woman who, in a world that scarcely imagined such a thing, simply took the throne of the pharaohs and held it, and used her power not to conquer but to build and to trade and to make beautiful things, and left as her monument a temple of unearthly grace and a painted voyage to the land of perfumes. But I must not leave you without the shadow that lay across her splendor, for it is the hinge of what comes next. All through her brilliant reign, her young stepson, the rightful heir she had stepped in front of, was growing up, Thutmose III, able, ambitious, and patient, biding his time in her shadow. When at last she died, he came to the throne, a man with a long memory and a colder heart, and one of his early acts was to go about her monuments and chisel out her name and hack away her image, trying to erase the woman king from history altogether, as though she had never reigned. He did not quite succeed. The stones remember her still. But the boy she had overshadowed was about to become the greatest conqueror Egypt ever produced, and to turn her peaceful empire into a thing of iron and blood. I am Pemberton, that was Hatshepsut, the woman who was king. Next, her stepson unleashed Thutmose III, and the day the whole fate of Asia was decided in the pass of Megiddo. Until then, mind the footnotes. And now the greatest of them all. When Hatshepsut died, her stepson Thutmose III came at last into his own, and a generation of waiting in a woman's shadow came out of him as pure conquering energy. He has been called, not wrongly, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. In 20 years he led some 17 campaigns into Asia and built an empire that reached from deep in the Sudan to the banks of the Euphrates. And the first of those campaigns gave us something precious beyond the victory itself, for the Battle of Megiddo is the first battle in all of human history that we can follow, step by step, almost hour by hour, from the words of those who fought it. Let me tell it to you as his own scribes carved it on the walls of Karnak.
The moment Hatshepsut was gone, Thutmose moved first against her memory, sending men to chisel her name and hack out her image from her own monuments as though to swallow up the years of her reign, and then against Asia, which had taken his distraction as a chance to revolt. The princes of Syria had formed a great league against Egypt, headed by the king of Kadesh, and had gathered their combined armies at a strong town commanding the road into the north, a town called Megiddo, set above the great plain of Esdraelon. Thutmose marched to meet them. And before the mountains that screened Megiddo, he held a council of war that the records preserve in full, the first general's council we can overhear. 3 roads led through the hills to Megiddo. 2 were short but ran through narrow defiles where the army would have to thread single file and could be cut to pieces if the enemy fell on it in the pass. The 3rd was longer but safe and open. His generals, sensibly, urged the safe road. And Thutmose refused in words that ring with the spirit of a born commander. He would take the dangerous short road, the narrow pass of Aruna, himself at the head. For if he went the long way round, he said, the vile enemy would say that Pharaoh had feared them and given them a wide berth, and that he would not endure. His officers bowed. May your father Ammon protect you. We will follow your majesty wherever you go. And the whole army, horse and foot, filed into the narrow mountain track behind their king, strung out helpless in single file, and the enemy incredibly let them come, never attacking the strung out column, so that the Egyptians debouched whole onto the plain before Megiddo. The bold stroke had worked. By my life, by the love that Ra hath for me, by the favor I enjoy from my master Ammon, my majesty will go by the way of Aruna. Let him that will go by the other roads, and let him that will follow my majesty. For the vile enemies will say, has his majesty gone by another road? For fear of us he gives us a wide berth. At dawn the next day Thutmose drew up his army in a single line across the plain, its right wing on the torrent, its left thrown out beyond the town, and he took the center himself, standing armed in a chariot of gleaming electrum, the records say, like the god Horus brandishing his spear. The Syrians, not expecting so swift an onslaught, broke at the first shock and fled in panic toward Megiddo, abandoning their very horses and chariots on the field. But the townsfolk, terrified the Egyptians would rush in among the fugitives, had slammed the gates so that the routed princes, the king of Kadesh among them, had to be hauled up over the walls by ropes and cloaks let down to them, scrambling ignominiously to safety. And here Thutmose's army threw away its greatest moment. Instead of storming the open ground and taking the town while its gates were shut and its lords dangling on ropes, the soldiers scattered across the field to plunder the rich abandoned camp, the gilded chariots, the heaped weapons, the spoil. By the time they had gathered it and rallied to their king, the chance was gone. Thutmose reproached them bitterly. Had you taken Megiddo this day, he said, with all the kings of the country shut up inside it, it would have been worth the taking of 1,000 towns. And so, the quick prize lost, the Egyptians settled down to do it the slow way, and here the records confess Egypt's one military weakness. She had never learned the art of storming a walled city. When scaling failed, all they could do was sit down and starve the place out. So they ringed Megiddo with a wall of their own and blockaded it, and waited for 7 long months until hunger did what the spear had not, and the great town surrendered with all the kings and treasure pent inside it. The booty was immense, and the back of the Syrian lead was broken. Megiddo was the making of Thutmose, and the first stone of his empire.
Let that close our chapter on the conqueror, and let me give you, in closing, the footnote about Megiddo that I have been saving, for it is the kind of thing this channel exists to point out, and it will strike some of you very deeply. This plain of Megiddo, where Thutmose fought the first recorded battle in the history of the world, sits astride the one great pass between the coast and the inland valleys, the throat of the land of Canaan, and because of that, it has been a battlefield over and over and over again, for 3,000 years, from Thutmose to General Allenby in the First World War. The Hebrews knew it well, it was Hebrew ground. And in their tongue the place was called Har Megiddo, the Mount of Megiddo. Say that aloud, slowly, and you will hear it, Har Megiddo. Armageddon. This very plain, where Egypt won her first great victory and history began to be written down, is the place whose name the book of Revelation gives to the last battle of all the world, the final gathering of the kings of the earth at the end of days. The oldest recorded battlefield and the prophesied last one are the same field, and bear the same name. Thutmose, brandishing his spear in his chariot of electrum, was fighting on the ground of Armageddon. I leave that with you to weigh. As for Thutmose himself, he went on campaign after campaign, 17 in all, until Egypt's empire ran from the heart of Africa to the Euphrates, and the great kingdom of Mitanni itself bowed and sent tribute, and he had it all carved, year by year, on the walls of the temple of Ammon at Karnak. The Annals, the first detailed war record in human history. I am Pemberton, that was Thutmose III, and the day of Megiddo. Next, the heirs of his empire, down to its golden noontide under Amenhotep the Magnificent, and there our volume will close. Until then, mind the footnotes. Thutmose III had built the empire, his heirs had now to hold it and to enjoy it. And in 3 reigns we watch Egypt pass from the iron of conquest to the gold of magnificence, from a strong-armed son who ruled by terror, through a prince who owed his crown to a dream beneath the Sphinx, to the dazzling golden noon of the whole age under Amenhotep III, the Magnificent. With him our volume will close, at the very summit of Egypt's glory. Let us climb to that summit.
First, the strong son, Amenhotep II, who inherited his father's empire and his father's hardness. He was famous, above all, for sheer bodily strength, a giant of a man, the records boast, who could draw a bow so stiff that no other man in the army could bend it, and who shot his arrows clean through targets of solid copper. And he held the conquered north by sheer terror. After crushing Assyrian revolt, he brought home 7 captive princes of the land of Taxi, slung head downward from the prow of his royal barge. 6 he hung upon the walls of Thebes, and the 7th he sent far south to be hung upon the walls of Napata in the Sudan, that the whole length of his empire, from end to end, might see the price of rebellion. I render it soberly, for it was meant soberly. This was an age that ruled by the visible display of dreadful power, and Amenhotep II understood the lesson exactly. Then a gentler and stranger story, how Thutmose IV came to the throne by a dream. He was a younger prince, not the destined heir, who one day while out hunting in the desert near the pyramids lay down to rest at noon in the shadow of the great Sphinx, that colossal lion-bodied figure which in those days lay buried to its very neck in the drifting desert sand. As the prince slept, the Sphinx spoke to him in a dream. It named itself as a great god, and complained that the sand was choking it, pressing upon it, burying it alive, and it made the young prince a bargain: clear away the sand that smothers me, and I will give thee the throne of Egypt, the double crown, in spite of thy elder brothers. The prince woke and did it. He cleared the sand from the Sphinx, and he came in time to the throne. And to prove the tale, he set up a great tablet of stone recording the dream between the paws of the Sphinx, where it stands to this very day, 4,000 years later. A king's promissory note from a god, still legible in the desert. The sand of the desert whereon I am laid has reached unto me. Clear it away from me, and I will give thee the kingship over the 2 lands, in front of all the living, and thou shalt wear the white crown and the red. And so to the summit, Amenhotep III, whom his own age and ours alike have called the Magnificent. Under him the empire his forefathers had bled to win lay quiet and obedient, and the tribute of half the world flowed into Thebes, and he spent it, as a great king should, on splendor. He raised some of the most beautiful buildings Egypt ever made, the soaring colonnades of the Temple of Luxor, and before his vanished mortuary temple the 2-seated giants we still call the Colossi of Memnon, that have gazed out over the plain of Thebes for 34 centuries. His was an age of wealth and art and ease, and of something new in the world: international diplomacy on a grand scale. The kings of Babylon and of Mitanni, and the rest wrote him letters. We have them still, the famous Amarna letters, baked on clay, addressing the pharaoh his brother, begging his gold, offering their daughters in marriage. Egypt sat at the head of the table of nations. And here, with real pleasure, I can close a circle for you, and I have met this magnificent king before, on this very channel, in another shape. When we studied Egypt's little carved scarabs, you may remember the great commemorative scarabs that one pharaoh sent out across his empire like a newspaper, to publish his news. That pharaoh was this one, Amenhotep III. It was he who proclaimed, on hundreds of those little stones, that he had married a woman named Ti and made her his great royal queen, and who, astonishingly, named her commoner parents Uya and Tuya, for all the world to read, so proud was he of the wife he had raised up beside him for love. It was he whose scarab boasted of the 102 fierce lions he had shot with his own bow in the first 10 years of his reign, he who published the vast pleasure lake he had dug for Queen Ti, and sailed upon it in the royal barge. The little beetle and the great history are the same king. The scarabs in the museum case are the personal voice of the Amenhotep whose golden ring crowns this whole volume. I find that a lovely thing, the smallest object and the largest story meeting in one magnificent man.
Let that close our last chapter on Egypt at her golden noon. We have come a very long way in this one volume, from a humiliated, divided land groaning under foreign shepherd kings, through a desperate war of liberation, up through the conquests of the great Thutmose, to this, the richest, most powerful, most splendid kingdom in the world, its empire reaching from the heart of Africa to the Euphrates, its king the brother of emperors, its queen a commoner he loved, its temples the wonder of the age. It is the summit. But I would not be honest, and I would not be Pemberton, if I did not tell you that a summit is also the place from which the road runs down. For all this magnificence is the calm before a storm, and the storm will come from inside the palace itself. Amenhotep the Magnificent had a son, and that son, when his turn came, would do the most extraordinary thing any pharaoh ever did. He would try to tear down the whole ancient religion of Egypt, abolish 1,000 gods, and command his people to worship one god only, the disk of the sun. His name was to be Akhenaten, the heretic king, and the convulsion he caused would shake the empire his fathers built and help bring this golden age to its end. But that is another volume and another night. For now we leave Egypt at her zenith, in the sunlight, before the shadow falls. I am Pemberton. This has been Maspero's History of Egypt's Imperial Age. Until then, mind the footnotes. And so we close this fourth volume of Maspero's Great History, the volume of Egypt's Imperial Age, and to my mind one of the most consequential stretches of the whole human story. Think of the arc we have travelled. We began with Egypt humbled and divided, groaning for a century under the foreign shepherd kings, the Hyksos. We watched the lords of Thebes rise in a long, bitter war of liberation until Ahmose stormed their last fortress and chased them out of the land and into Palestine. We saw that war of liberation harden Egypt into a conqueror and pour her armies out across Syria. We stood with Thutmose III in the pass of Aruna and on the field of Megiddo, and watched him build an empire from the Sudan to the Euphrates. And we have ended here, at the golden noon of it all, with Amenhotep the Magnificent, the brother of emperors. That is the shape of the volume: humiliation, liberation, conquest, and glory. But I have promised you all through these Egyptian nights that I would point out where this history touches the world of the Bible, and this volume has touched it again and again, not by my forcing but by its own honest record. We met at Beni Hassan, the Semitic chief in Abisha, leading his clan and his flocks down into Egypt in the age of the patriarchs, the man whom many identify with Abraham, doing exactly what Genesis says Abraham did. We found the first shepherd king bearing what may be the very title Scripture gives to Joseph, the governor of Egypt. We surveyed the canon the pharaohs marched into and found it: peoples and gods and cities and very words, the identical canon of the Old Testament, 2 witnesses describing one world. We saw Ahmose pursue his enemies to Sharuhan, a town of the book of Joshua. And we stood on the plain of Megiddo, Megiddo, Armageddon, where the first battle in recorded history was fought on the ground the last book of the Bible names for the last battle of the world. I have offered every one of these as what it honestly is, a real and striking correspondence between the spade and the Scripture, and left the weighing of it to you. I am Pemberton. That has been the Imperial Age of Egypt, in plain English. Next we turn from the kings to the soul of Egypt, her own sacred literature, her hymns and her Book of the Dead, and her vision of the judgment that waits beyond the grave. Thank you, as ever, for your company. Until then, mind the footnotes. In short, the Imperial Age of Egypt, humiliation under the Hyksos, the Theban War of Liberation, the conquests of the 18th dynasty, and the Golden Peak under Amenhotep III. The Hyksos, shepherd kings, Asiatic Semites who ruled Egypt for a century until Ahmose stormed Avaris, drove them out, and founded the 18th dynasty, the trauma that turned a sheltered valley into a conquering empire. Hatshepsut, the woman who reigned as king, her age of peace, her temple at Deir el-Bahari, and the famous trading voyage to the incense land of Punt. Thutmose III, the Napoleon of Egypt, the bold gamble of the Aruna Pass, and the Battle of Megiddo, history's first battle we can follow in detail, then an empire from Nubia to the Euphrates, carved as the annals of Karnak. Amenhotep III the Magnificent, the golden zenith of wealth, art, and diplomacy, the same king whose personal voice we heard on the commemorative scarabs, Queen T, the 102 lions, the pleasure lake. The biblical correspondences offered as genuine, Abisha the patriarch age caravan chief identified with Abraham, Salatis bearing Joseph's title, the canon of the prophets seen from the Egyptian side, Sharuhan of Joshua, and Megiddo, Armageddon, the first recorded battlefield and the Bible's prophesied last one. The volume ends at the calm before the storm. Amenhotep III's son will be the heretic Akhenaten, who will try to overthrow the gods of Egypt.